Welcome everyone. I'm Archesman Mahapatra, Executive Director, Grid Council, your moderator for this evening, as I take this opportunity of welcoming you all to this fireside chat, where we shall be discussing about the relevance of hydration in hospitalized patients. And for the next 1 hour, we have a fantastic panel, and we shall be getting some expert inputs, some views and insights to this topic, which is often not as much prioritized. Uh, as we all know that India has uh, uh, the climate is too heterogeneous, and of course we have a lot of diseases, both communicable and non-communicable diseases, and a high burden, in fact. As we get admitted, our entire focus goes on managing the disease, and hydration, balancing out fluids, electrolytes, and energy is often not as much prioritized as they should be. Consequently, recovery is delayed, and the, the course of the disease is quite protracted, and it has its own direct and indirect costs and overall outcomes as well. Today we have a fantastic panel to take up discussions. So can I request Dr. Ashwin Davi, sir, to please switch on your video and come live. Dr. Davi is the honorary president of IAPEN, India Association for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition. He is a member of Executive Council of European Society of Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism, and our country's first European diploma in clinical nutrition and metabolism. Welcome, sir, to this panel, to this discussion. And we also have Dr. Preeti Thakur, General Manager, Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson. It's rained a bit this evening in Noida. I'm based out of Noida. And I have Dr. Davi joining from Ahmedabad and Dr. Thakur from Mumbai. I once again welcome you to this panel. And as you know, this is a topic that we do not discuss as often, and I hope that our audience will be looking forward to learning more about this. Of course, the fundamentals, the basics, and as we build upon the different nuanced aspects of hydration in hospitalized patients. So, Dr. Dabi, I'll go right away to you. And as I initiate this discussion, I also take this opportunity of thanking the Times Group, especially Economic Times Health World, for organizing this discussion. And this is, again, an opportunity of enlightening us, including the audience, on this topic. So, sir, can you tell us about the factors that contribute to dehydration in patients in healthcare settings, the importance of hydration, and how it can help in early recovery?
So to answer your first question, Dr. Achesman, first I just like to make a comment that hydration is defined as the supply and retention of water in the biological tissue. Dehydration in context of this panel refers to loss of body water with or without salt at a rate greater than body can replace it, so that these people, they become dehydrated. The optimal hydration and nutrition remains fundamental to the health. Many patients in healthcare setting do not drink enough fluid, and often what they drink is cups of teas and coffees, and which generally act as a diuretic, and that is why making them go to the loo quite often, and thereby they become dehydrated. Patients who have inadequate fluid intake are at increased risk of various diseases like urinary tract infection, falls, and low blood pressure, etc. And also, you know that in a hospital setup, particularly critical care setup, many a times we do not give total feeding to the patient. So we call it a permissive underfeeding, which is acceptable in critical care setting. But reducing the total energy target inadvertently leads to the reduction in the fluid delivery. So that is how these patients become dehydrated. And all strategies to enhance the fluid delivery should be optimized. Like many a times nurses, they do lots of gastric aspiration and remove the fluid from the stomach and they just throw it away. And also because patients are taken for CT scan or some procedure physiotherapy so that they hold the feeding. So there are a number of reasons patients are not able to get the optimum liquid in. Similarly, if, based on the criteria from kidney disease improving global outcome, this was a cross-sectional study of 97 intensive care unit worldwide demonstrated that on admission to ICU, almost 57% of patients had a acute kidney injury, which is most likely due to the low fluid intake, apart from sepsis and drug-induced kidney injury. So, a systemic review of signs associated with volume depletion after vomiting and diarrhea suggests that no signs are individually useful in detecting this, but that a person having at least four of the following signs, seven signs, if they have a four signs present, then it is more likely to have moderate to severe volume depletion. Particularly if the patient is confused, non-fluent speech, extremely weakness, dry mucous membrane, dry tongue, furrowed tongue, sunken eyes. However, it is suggested that this form of diagnosis needs further assessment. So this is very important that dehydration has a very important role in day-to-day care. This is I just thought to highlight about the question that many
Yes.
factors contributes to dehydration.
Yes, sir, that's a very nice overview. Dr. Preeti, would you like to come in here and give some introductory statements?
So as we all know, the body is composed of about 65 to 70% of the water. And when the person is ill, especially with fever, what happens is body is really going to lose water rapidly. For an adult who has a temperature of about 102 degrees Fahrenheit, sweating leads to loss of about 900 ml of approximate 900 ml of fluids in 24 hours. And there would be increased insensible losses, which may be approximately about 90 ml when the patient is not feeling well. The insensible losses actually are increased by about 25% for every 1 degree rise in temperature above 37 degrees centigrade. So therefore, it becomes really critical to address, to understand the fluid needs for these patient population. Now, these fluid deficits can get further magnified if the patient is having other conditions like nausea, vomiting is there, or diarrhea is there, or there may be an inadequate fluid intake because of poor appetite. So as per the American Society of Parenteral Enteral Nutrition, they have released the guidelines wherein they talk about role of nutrition, hydration in recovery. And they have just given simple steps which can be followed to keep the body hydrated as well as nourished, like drinking water or having clear liquid fluids, monitoring for signs of dehydration, what Dr. Ashwin Dabi just now mentioned about, and can keep on looking forward for if there's increased thirst, if there's dark colored urine, if there is dry mouth, and at the same time keep a focus on nourishment, nutrition, give the right intake of proteins as well as calories. So this is what I would want to add.
Touching upon the different clinical aspects of it, and taking up the management of fluid, electrolyte, and energy in a more guideline based, protocol based way. Dr. Dabi, you mentioned about patients who have inadequate intake of fluids would could be at a higher risk of UTIs or incontinence or lower BP, disorientation, falls, confusion. Would you like to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, already you know that adequate hydration is required to maintain the circulation. And that is very important that critically in patients, their neurohormonal response in the body is also altered. And because of lots of cytokines which are released from the body, which creates one particular state because of the hyperinflammation and oxidative stress. So that is where we feel that if we do not optimize nutrition, hydration, and the primary cause of the disease, then these people are likely to develop a condition which is, we call it a immunodeficiency. And then there is a subsequent risk of infections, increased mortality, morbidity, multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, increased support of ventilation, renal replacement therapy. So this is very important that over hydration and under hydration both are very dangerous in hospitalized patients. So there is a very narrow balance we have to maintain in such situation, so that we always ask our healthcare people to keep checking the flu chart every 8 hourly, and the medical team should be checking it daily in their daily rounds, and they should discuss among each other so that their patients will get benefited out of optimum care.
But so this looks a bit now, the complexity is now getting obvious as we discuss further. Uh, Awareness about managing fluids or hydration could be a tertiary set of phenomenon, like across all levels. People, I don't think, are much aware. Do you? How informed are our healthcare professionals about hydration, and what kind of awareness and training and capacity building measures do you think we need to reduce the risk of again dehydration or even overhydration, as you said, sir?
So this is an excellent questions, because every time we think of hospitalized patient, what we think that sickness means give injections, pills, and they should be all right. Everybody wants a remote control effect, like switch on the uh, push the button and TV should be switched on. It's not like that, at least in the medical care. So there is a requirement that the people who use healthcare services have a adequate nutrition and hydration to sustain life and good health and reduce the risk of dehydration while they receive the care and treatment. The exception to this is when meeting of such hydration needs would not be in the service users' best interest or without their consent, like somebody who is very moribund with a terminally ill cancer patient. So that is where we might scratch our head. Say, for example, the National Health Service, United Kingdom, the Health and Social Care Act 2008 regulated activities outlines healthcare providers where it is their role and must make sure that people have enough to eat and drink to meet their nutrition and hydration needs and receive support they need to do so, and also elaborated on meeting of the nutritional and hydration need of a service user is a part of the arrangement made for the provision of care or treatment by the service provider, and take all necessary measures including educating all staff, voluntary worker, patients, caregivers on the importance of good nutrition and hydration. Patients identified as a dehydration or at a risk of dehydration should have an appropriate planned care advised and implemented, which may include referral to any other healthcare agencies in case of any support is required. Patients should be offered food, fluids, and medication that enable them to meet their nutritional and hydration needs and are appropriate for their medical condition and eating, drinking, and swallowing ability. And always, many a times what happens that when doctor comes in rounds and the meals are served, so people they keep their meals and fluids beside and they will attend the doctor. So now in most of the hospital, these meal times are protected. So during the meal times, no doctor visits or any physiotherapy or any other visits are permitted. So these meal times and environment should be conducive to the eating. So this concept of protected meal time should be adopted in all inpatient units. Community staff should ensure that meal times and in between meals are required. Whatever patient wants, like food and drinks, should be served at a suitable temperature for safety and palatability. And patients should have an individual nutrition and hydration care plan documented in their medical records, and it should be communicated to the ground staff who are involved in their patient care. So this is very important that formal hydration status should be screened using subjective biochemical and clinical parameters. So this is very important to protect the meal timing for these things. So education of our healthcare provider, as we said that India Association of Parental and Enteral Nutrition (IAP), and we conduct lots of educational endeavors to empower the healthcare person. Otherwise, what will happen that for small things you have to bother the consultant. So it is nurses, dietitians, physiotherapists, allied healthcare workers. They all should learn about hydration strategy.
So it's sort of a multidisciplinary approach where you
Correct.
want to sensitize all.
Yeah.
And what I could understand is you want to take the sensitization efforts beyond intensive care, and right.
Exactly. Every even say for example, in many Indian hospitals, these meals and liquids are brought by the relatives from the home. So it is the on-duty nurse duty to check whether this liquid and food is at optimum temperature, having good recommended as per the recommendation given by the nutrition and hydration support group. So this is all they should keep checking for every patient.
Right, sir. Pardon my ignorance on this, but then how does hydration help in early and overall recovery? I understand that Dr. Preeti highlighted about the Aspen guidelines. You have also spoken about UK aspects. Can you also touch upon hydration and surgical recovery, like the ERAS guidelines and all?
So all of you know that the surgical recovery, this enhanced recovery after surgery, that is a complete name of the ERAS protocol. And just to briefly update you that dehydration and overhydration is associated with poor clinical outcomes and increased healthcare cost, including the recovery from illness and surgery. So nutrition care process is the term used to ensure appropriate nutritional and hydration intake. And dehydration in the context of this policy refers to loss of body water with and without salt at a rate greater than body cannot replace it. So patients should not be made nil by mouth or order a fluid only liquid diet without a care plan for nutrition support. But utilization of oral, enteral and parenteral routes of hydration should be considered to ensure that patients' hydration needs are met. Prolonged period of post-operative fasting, as meant this was a fashion in our country. They were kept overnight fast so that these patients they reach to the operation theater in a state of fluid depletion, which may be further compounded by the indiscriminate bowel preparation, which is another practice, and that is shown to have positive, not shown to have positive impact on surgical outcome. So enhanced recovery after surgery, ERA's preoperative fasting guidelines, they reduce this fasting period. So they give solid food up to the 6 hours before surgery, and they allow liquid foods up to 2 hours before the surgery. And now in some daycare procedure, they allow liquids even up to patients are just put on the operation theater table. So example of this preoperative clear liquids includes, but are not limited to water. They are fruit juices without pulp. They are carbohydrate rich, particularly maltodextrin rich nutritional drink. They are liquid oral rehydration solutions, carbonated beverages, clear tea and coffee. Everything is allowed up to 2 hours. And these pre-operative drinks have probably metabolic benefits of reducing the insulin resistance in addition to improving the patient satisfaction, reducing the thirst, hunger, and post-operative nausea and vomiting. And these metabolic benefits center around creating a fed and anabolic state before the surgery, so which reduces the post-operative hyperglycemia, which is a risk factor for hospital-acquired infections. So these are all robust benefit and evidences are available now. And I had an opportunity to work for the one of the founder of this IRAS concept, Dr. Ole Lindqvist from Sweden, who when he invented this post-operative hyperglycemia, he was debarred from attending the operation theater for 1 month by his professor. So this is all, science is evolving.
Yes, it's very heartening to see that we are learning and improving with our practices. It's becoming more and more patient friendly. So, we know that each disease has its own profile, and of course, the course again is determined by the disease's natural history as well as the individual's physiology. One
Right.
vulnerable population that we usually get in our IPDs are elderly people.
Correct.
Their physiologies are specifically vulnerable to dehydration and electrolyte imbalances and all sorts. And it's a growing problem because day by day our number of elderly in our country is also likely to go up. Survival is going up, non-communicable diseases and all those things are also there. We are managing them better, but of course, morbidity profile could go up. How should it be tackled, and what are the steps to be taken by the healthcare practitioners and the overall fraternity, sir?
So at least I'm happy that because of the very good health infrastructure, now we see our elderly people going, population going up. But as you rightly say that we want these elderly people to remain healthy. So we do not want to increase the sick elderly people. So older people are most at risk of dehydration due to loss of water, due to many a times they use and abuse laxative for constipation, and diuretics they are prescribed by their doctors. They both causes loss of water, and this is not compensated by elderly patients because they don't drink enough water, and over a time this decline in drinking can lead to dehydration, which in elderly people can be worrisome because in elderly people there are changes due to aging process, which means that the older person has a reduced sensitivity to hunger. So their brain does not register the fact that they need to have a drink. And if they are not regularly reminded to drink water, then this will happen that they will become dehydrated. And older people who have had a stroke or who have a Alzheimer's disease, and they also have a reduced sensitivity and need very careful monitoring. So dehydration due to loss of water is associated with higher mortality, morbidity, disability, falls, and its consequences in older people. Therefore, in 2018, European Society of Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism, they laid a guidelines on hydration in geriatric population, which suggests that all older people should be considered at risk of low intake dehydration. Remember, in a countries like India where this climate is very hot and humid, So all elderly people should be considered at a risk of low intake dehydration and should be encouraged to consume adequate amount of drinks. So individual fluid needs are related to energy consumption, water losses and kidney functions. So larger people may require more fluid, maybe up to 6 to 8 glasses per day. So this is how we should be telling elderly people to drink fluid frequently.
Mr. Thank you. Thank you for touching upon the issues with elderly people. Now, I'd like to switch gears to yet another aspect. Our patients who are on IV fluids already, how do we bring them back to oral hydration? What are the do's and don'ts? And if you could elaborate on the protocols that could be followed and where one needs to be cautious.
You want me to answer this question, Dr. Ajisman, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, so this switching from intravenous to oral fluid is very tricky. But what generally we practiced over centuries that IV fluids will be stopped when patient is established on adequate oral intake and which is likely to persist long term. This is very important. Suppose patient takes 1 or 2 sips and then we decide, oh, this patient is taking, let's remove IV fluid. Then this patient will again end up with some kind of dehydration. So when we are understood that there is a long-term establishment of oral intake, we can simply remove the intravenous fluid. So when ready to eat and drink, patients should be encouraged to do so, providing there are no medical, nursing or surgical contraindication. Apart from that, IV fluid makes the patient immobile. So hence it will delay the recovery and therefore transition from IV to oral fluid should be safe and as early as possible. But in Indian hospitals, I have seen that IV fluids are often continued unnecessarily and indiscriminately, leading to fluid overload as well as increased risk of this IV line cannula sepsis. And if you give too much of fluid in a post-operative patients, then their gastrointestinal paralysis will take longer time to recover. So this is very important. Don't overhydrate the patient. If you optimize the hydration, then this gastrointestinal function returns to normal very rapidly. And this absence of bowel sounds in India is a fashion. They put the stethoscope on the abdomen and they check for the absence sounds. That is a myth. We never check that. When sounds are absent, that does not mean that food and drink cannot be allowed. So these are all myths which are being practiced in this country. So staff should be routinely asked to monitor patients' ability to how they are comfortable drinking fluid and nutrition, and that hydration should be monitored daily. And many a times these patients in critically ill set up for neurological lesion, or like in COVID, they had a prolonged endotracheal tube. So they have that particular dysphagia. So in such patient, we don't give liquid, we give a thickened texture modified food so that it improves the swallowing reflex, so that we make sure that they receive adequate fluids and hydration. So drinks providing fluid with a hydrating effect on our bodies include water, sparkling water, liquid oral rehydration solution, flavored water, hot and cold tea, coffee, milk, milky drink, fruit juices, soups. So many things are there. So this is very important that IV to intravenous to oral switch should be as fast as possible, because we cannot afford increased length of stay, which is very going to become a health burden for all.
Yeah, that actually stitches clinical medicine and public health dimensions to it. I see that, sir, you have rightly pointed out. I've been like keeping Dr. Preeti in the waiting for long. Ma'am, so apologies for like, and also thank you for being so patient. Would you like to chip in here and add, there are other guidelines also you might want to talk about some of them, sir, ma'am? Yeah.
So actually, Dr. Ashwin Dabi covered and touched all the important aspects that need to be considered for shifting a patient from IV to oral. Maybe what I can just add is with respect to the guidelines which are available and what the guidelines do recommend. So there are nice 2013 algorithms which talk about IV fluid therapy. There is International Fluid Academy recommendation available, and they do talk about providing IV fluids only for patients whose needs cannot be met with oral or enteral routes. And they do also recommend to stop as soon as possible and shift onto the oral route, as Dr. Dabi mentioned. Oral intake of fluids, if possible, to be recommended at maximum times, and they do also talk about avoiding unnecessary IV fluids. So it is really critical and important to assess each and every patient and the needs, and then the status, whether patient is able to take oral or not, and accordingly decide the duration for IV fluid administration.
Can I add, Dr. Rajesh?
Yes, sir. Please, please, sir.
So, like we have a one clear-cut line to differentiate IV from oral. Somebody with a massive fluid requirement, like somebody who has a severe gastroenteritis or a protracted vomiting, or somebody who has a major third-degree burns, or somebody with a polytrauma and blood loss. These are all, or somebody with a acute severe pancreatitis. So these are all conditions where we feel that we will not be able to optimize the hydration by oral routes. So these all such people, they will need intravenous hydration to begin with, so that we can resuscitate the patient well, and then we continue maintenance fluid, including those people with diabetic ketoacidosis. So pregnancy-induced hyperemesis gravidarum. So these are all indication where we have to take the support of intravenous fluid per se.
I see one of the audience questions quite befitting the discussion that we're having now. This one comes from Ms. Patel, and she's asking if we could relate hyponatremia and acute kidney injuries in fluid management, and of course, any other aspect you'd like to touch upon, Dr. Dabi.
Yeah, so per se, hyponatremia means there is a low level of sodium in the blood. So generally, these sodium disorders are primarily not because of the sodium itself. These sodium disorders are primarily because of the increase and decrease in the total body water. So when the total body water are increased in body, then the sodium level will go down. We call it a acute hyponatremia. So these patients with acute kidney injury, all of you know that the kidney doesn't work well. So these people, we will restrict the fluid, and our aim, our target is to give the minimum urine output of 0.5 per 0.5 ml per kilogram body weight per hour. So that is the minimum urine output we aim for. And secondly, what the amount of fluid we give is the amount of total urine output in 24 hours. Plus we add 500 into that. So that is the total volume we will give to these patients with AKI.
And that's in that helps in early recovery.
Yeah.
There is this another question coming from Mr. Debabrata Ghosh from West Bengal, and he's asking, after overnight rest to keep rehydrated our system, how much water intake is recommended, and can you advise if it is pure water or along with other nutrient? I guess this depends on age and morbidity profile, but then, sir, to you.
But this is for a healthy people or for a sick people?
That's what I thought. Maybe let's.
For a healthy people, like if we keep ourselves overnight hydrated, so generally we healthy people, they have a very strong osmoreceptors, in our body. So a moment you feel thirsty, you will grab a glass of water and drink it. So generally we do not calculate, but so honestly speaking, we as a biology students, we are very poor in mathematical calculation. But generally, it is recommended that 25 to 35 ml per kilogram body weight uh, for healthy people. In a winter season, we prefer the lower value, 25 ml per kilogram body weight. And in a hot and humid condition like this, we prefer 35 ml per kilogram body weight per day. But if you have any other medical reasons to reduce the fluid, like congestive heart failure or decompensated liver disease, then you have to reduce your volume according to the medical condition.
Yeah, so what we usually do is, like, if you see that your morning urine is too deep yellow, just have some water. It will get you back hydrated.
And many people they drink like 4 glasses in the morning on wake up. So these are all various tricks.
Sir, do you think fluid-based audit system, now that we are already talking about how much fluid we need per liter per kilogram, all that calculation, do you think a fluid-based audit system is required in hospitals? How will it help in detecting dehydration in patients, and what are the advantages of it?
Oh, excellent question, Dr. Ashish man, because this is, you touch my heart. I tell you that audit is required not only in fluid, but in every aspect of patient care, whether it is energy, protein, calorie, whatever audit is the only thing it will tell us whether what we people are doing is good, best, better or worst compared to rest of the world. So fluid balance monitoring is a part of the scope of nurses practice. The incorrect calculation of the fluid balance means that every patient management decision was influenced by inaccurate fluid balance information. Therefore, nurses working in the hospitals are responsible and accountable for the accurate recording of the calculation of fluid balance when caring for the inpatient. In inpatient units where fluid intake is of concern, you have to identify those sick patients. A fluid balance chart should be maintained and that should be reviewed every 8 hours or more frequently if required if patient's condition is not good. And medical team should be informed if fluid output or input is reduced or excessive. The audit examines the main parts of the fluid balance monitoring. One is the hemodynamic parameters such as vital signs such as pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and monitoring patient's electrolyte status, capillary refill time, skin elasticity, recording the input prescription administration in form of intravenous infusion, tube feeding, or maybe parenteral nutrition and the blood transfusion. Medications also were monitored, especially when patients are on diuretic. So, intake, output, and fluid balance were monitored from observations and patients folders. The audit also include any observation part in which the researchers observe nurses' current fluid balance, perform such a check, amount, type, intake, intravenous, oral, whatever way, urine output or vomiting, drainage, and adjust the intravenous or the oral infusion rate accordingly. And this actual fluid balance from observation and prescription and compared it with the recorded patient's file. If both researcher calculation and the recorded fluid balance match, the calculated fluid balance was accepted as accurate. And if does not match with the fluid balance record, then we can assume that sister has not done an appropriate job. So maintaining a correct balance of fluid in body is very crucial to health. However, according to the Care Quality Commission recent report, enough fluids are not being given for every patient. And that is where nurses plays a crucial role. Just 5 to 10% fluctuation in fluid volume can result in adverse impact on the health, up to only 5 to 10%. So, Scales and Pillsworth, the scientists, they identify three main elements of for fluid balance monitoring, which are clinical assessment, blood chemistry, and fluid balance chart. So this is what I feel that we have to improvise in our day-to-day care. And it's not only nurses, doctor, dietitian, whoever is taking care of patient, as you rightly said, multidisciplinary team, they all should be held accountable for this fluid balance chart and appropriate care of the patient.
There are a couple of questions on nursing care coming up for you, sir. Dr. Preeti, would you like to add a line here?
Yeah, so I think when I hear Dr. Ashwin Dabhi and the way he has put up the need for putting all the protocols in place and documenting the what is the input, what is the output, I think this gives an opportunity also to explore data generation around it and look at, okay, what are the protocols that are being practiced? Are they really having an impact of recovery? Because we do understand and we have various information available how they help in recovery, but this evidence generation is something which will really help us further strengthen what are the right protocols that needs to be followed. I think that is the only thing which comes to my mind right now when I hear what Dr. Dabhi is saying.
Oh, that's a fantastic point, madam. Actually, if we could generate and integrate the data that we have from our own unique contexts, we'll be able to come up with very contextualized protocols as well. Fantastic point, ma'am. Thank you for that.
So we are in a process to make our own hydration guidelines for the Indian population. So very soon you will have that position paper available for all healthcare people, so that they will have an a ready reckoner in when they take the rounds in the hospitals. They keep it in their pocket, and that is how I think iatrogenic cause of deaths will reduce over a period of time.
That's a great news. If there are protocols which are getting rolled out, it really helps in elevating the standard of care.
And the standardization of our practices and training. So you have a protocol, a reckoner in hand, and accordingly you can distribute who does what and to what level. So that's again the question that I was about to take up. And this one reads like, appropriate hydration being so important for patient recovery. Do we have this subject as part and parcel of nursing training?
Correct. So actually, it's hydration basically comes under a broad topic of nutrition. So this is everybody, they have their theoretical knowledge they learn during their undergraduate and the postgraduate uh, studies, not only in nursing, but also in the dietetic professional and the medical graduates, and also in the physiotherapy department. So, uh, but only issue is that, as you rightly said, that they are not integrated with their hospital-based practices. So whatever we learn in the theory classes, we never had any opportunity to visit the patient and learn the applied aspect of hydration and the nutrition. So there is a huge gap, and we are now trying to bridge the gap by giving all these nursing student, dietetic student, medical student in form of giving them a 3 months, 6 months rotating internship in the hospitals, so that they will have an actual exposure to the clinical care of the patient. So this is how I think we will make a roadmap, so that they will have a better understanding of what they learn in the undergraduate and the postgraduate.
Yes, so we have some standardized protocols and some translation mechanisms. So how do we take it to the bedside? It's a good thought, sir. Comprehensive one. Two quick questions, and I'll take both the questions together. How will the patient know that he's getting dehydrated in a hospital? And can designing digital solutions for nurses help to track hydration help in hospitals? So again, very much relatable to auditing and monitoring.
So yeah, patient can some alert patients, they are very sensitive that they feel lethargy, weakness, confusion, slurring of speech, dryness, confusion, disorientation. So these are all signs of impending dehydration. And also from the vital data monitoring, like once you become dehydrated, you develop low blood pressure, tachycardia, which you can see on the screen. So this is how you can detect it. But unfortunately, we do not have like you put a thermometer in the mouth and say it's 101. Yeah. So we do not have. We just have the subjective assessment of the dehydration. And we can categorize them into like mild, moderate, and severe. But to know the exact state of dehydration, category of mild, moderate, and severe dehydration, the one best test is to check the spot urinary sodium concentration. So if the urinary sodium concentration is uh, 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 more than 20 mole per liter, then this is uh, suggestive of severe dehydration. This is spot urinary sodium is very important test to identify and categorize the patient in this mild, moderate, and severe dehydration. There are other complex tests like serum osmolality, urine osmolality, but it's so much of them we cannot do it routinely. So most of the time, it's experience of a medical team, and they use their experience, and very rarely they take the help of this urinary sodium.
So the first point is like being sensitive that someone could get dehydrated, and then you use your experience and scientific understanding.
The best answer to that patient, you identify which are the patients who are at risk of dehydration. Elderly people, those patients who are on diuretic treatment, those patients who are on laxative, those patients who are on antibiotic or chemotherapy or any drug which suppresses their appetite so that reduce drink and everything. So these are all some indicators there we can identify that with this patient we need to do some extra check with respect to their fluid intake, which is very important.
Yeah, a target, a risk stratified approach, or
If we
maintaining a high vigil. So, Dr. Preeti, you highlighted on that data integration issue. Of course, there are a gamut of approaches that one may take up. Going forward, what is your point of view on relevance and importance of the role of oral fluid, electrolytes, and energy management in patients admitted to our hospitals? And of course, how could we do better?
Yeah, so I think the points which Dr. Ashwin Dabi has already addressed, it is becoming very clear that the management of oral hydration as well as energy is critical to recovery from various illnesses. When it comes to dehydration management, diarrhea is one condition, which is really studied very well, and there is enough evidence which is available. But when we look at dehydration from various other illnesses, there is actually a gap in terms of whatever data is available. So I do see a scope, in terms of partnering with the healthcare professionals as well as various institutes, how we can strengthen the data generation in terms of documentation around dehydration and how does really dehydration impact recovery. What is the role of oral fluids and electrolytes given which helps in having an beneficial impact on the recovery along with the energy management. So this is one aspect where there is a huge scope in terms of partnership and doing a evidence generation, strengthening the available evidence, which again further helps us in establishing and putting forth the guidelines. So Dr. Dabi already mentioned that he's working on the guidelines for hydration. So if there is Indian evidence also which is available, it further helps in strengthening those guidelines from India perspective. Secondly, the other aspect which I would also want to touch upon is it would be really great partnering with the doctors to understand if there is an unmet need gap in terms of if there is any oral specific formulation that is required, which addresses for a patient who's recovering, that really helps in building the armamentarium which the patient can actually or the doctor can actually use for the patient, which is helping in overall improvement from a recovery perspective.
Thank you, madam. The role of partnerships and coming together cannot be overemphasized. It's like taken. We need to work together. Dr. Davi, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, that's very fantastic thing. Dr. Preeti said that only thing that, as I already said, that there is a huge gap. India is a large country, and to bridge the gap between these medical professionals, dietetic professional, and the nursing professionals is a humongous task. But yes, like many hospitals, they have applied for that National Accreditation Board of Hospital, NABH accreditation. So once you receive the accreditation, there is a mandatory requirement that every accredited patient, they have to do the nutritional screening within 24 hours. So this nutritional screening includes the hydration screening also. So then this is how we can improvise the strategies that making a departmental wise team. Like if there is a one nutrition champion in the hospital, he cannot go to 500, 600, 700 patients. So there is a, if it is a multi-speciality hospital, then from every specialty, they should pick up some 5-6 people who are interested to take up this clinical nutrition and hydration strategy in their department. And one of them, they can lead in that department, and respectively, every discipline, they have such one leader and the entirety. And from them, they make the hospital nutrition committee, so that they get sit together and on monthly basis, and they should all do the audit of the nutrition and hydration in their hospital patients. So this is how we have launched a concept of accrediting the hospital as a center for excellence, and we are providing training to all hospital doctors, paramedics, allied healthcare workers, how to launch and develop a nutrition and hydration support strategy group in their hospital. So because this is a very large country, it will take us like a few months to few years to establish such state-of-an-art center for excellence in clinical nutrition and hydration across the India. But slowly and steadily, we are moving towards to empower all the people, so that patients, they are benefited by getting what is best available options in the world.
Thank you, sir. This has been a very enlightening 1 hour of discussion. We have a couple of questions and maybe a very brief 1 or 2 liner answers. There is one question from Ms. Anuradha: how to improve oral fluid intake in an older patient who's suffering from Parkinson's disease, probably like dementia patients and all.
So as I already said that the elderly people, they do not have a thirst sensation. So regularly asking them to drink the fluid. But because they have a dysphagia, you have to use other jelly form. Give the jelly so that they will be converted into liquids in the body. This is one way they can improve. So thick liquid should be given to them to improve the liquid intake.
There's one question from Ms. Rekha. How is interstitial fluid influenced by fluid balance?
See, interstitial fluid, no, it's not only interstitial fluid, but the fluid has a very different compartment. Intracellular, that is within the cell. Between the cell, that is a intercellular. And the third one is the intravascular, that is circulate in the blood. So this interstitial fluid is balanced by the albumin level in the blood. So the albumin is a protein in the blood. So this albumin level, they generate a pressure which is known as a oncotic pressure. And there are salt in the blood like sodium, potassium, chloride. And they all generate a osmotic pressure. So these two pressure, they maintain the interstitial fluid. So there is a exchange of fluid from plasma to interstitial fluid. There is a exchange either way, and there is a exchange of fluid from interstitial space to the intracellular. So this is how it is delicately balanced.
Thank you, sir. There are two more questions, but for want of time, we'll not be able to take them up. But the questions can be addressed once your guidelines are out. So it's about like how long patients would need IV feeding, tube feeding, what method is more suitable, and consecutive positive balance in critically ill patients now. So
A very endless topic. So
yeah, but excuse us, our dear audience, our viewers. Your questions will have to wait for the guidelines to come up. We, as Dr. Dabi said, a contextualized guideline is on the anvil, and that guideline will be released any day from now. So thank you so much, Dr. Davi. Thank you so much, Dr. Preeti. It has been a very informative session, and I personally could not feel how 1 hour passed by. We touched upon clinical management, the need to engage multiple disciplines, the need to sensitize our colleagues in nursing care, in nutrition care, to collaborate, to go beyond just managing the disease, but the overall hydration and climbing down from IV fluids to oral hydration. All those aspects we touched. We touched upon the vulnerable populations, elderly, people with different types of disease profiles. Any concluding statements, Dr. Dabi and Dr. Preeti?
thank you so much, Achisman, and thank you, Dr. Preeti and ET Health World. It was all our pleasure to exchange the ideas about this. Very important, because when I read newspaper that people simply dying because of the fluid imbalance, we get disheartened, and it's a displeasure for us. So we thought of bringing this awareness, at least in the healthcare communities, to improve the patient care.
Yeah, so once again, thanks to the ET team for planning this session and getting the most ignored or neglected topic, I would say, for the conversation. So every time I do interact with Dr. Dabi, there are new learnings which always come up. So today is again the same day where there are multiple things which even, while I'm adding, talking, I could learn from him and understand more in terms of how is it really important on managing the food electrolytes and energy, and again its impact on recovery for the patient population. So thank you so much for providing this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Davi. Thank you, Dr. Preeti. And thank you, our audience, for staying with us all through this discussion. Thank you, ET Health World, for this opportunity.